Hey Vince, thanks for joining me today for the Broadleaf Spotlight.
Thank you for inviting me.
I was wondering, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. My name is Vince Marello. By my books, I go by VC Marello, and currently I'm an IT manager at a healthcare system in Nashville area. And I grew up in Northern California, and excuse me, and I was very good in science and math. I went on to college actually as a pre-med student, going to be that big doctor and just make tons of money and just have a great life. And then halfway through the school, I discovered that wasn't my passion. Um, I was finding limitations in my science courses that I found my professors frustrating, to where they didn't want to explore the world. And I wanted to. I wanted to know about Einstein's theories. I wanted to know about all these cutting edge things I'd read about in science, but the professors weren't there. They're like, just do your homework. And so I just got really discouraged and ended up having a general ed class in communications. And the dean saw one of my projects and he goes, if you're not a major in communication, you need to be here. He goes, I've never seen a student do what you did with this video. And I'm like, I just made it up and I thought everybody else did. And he basically talked me into changing my major to film production screenwriting. And I didn't even know that was a degree you could get. So when I discovered that, my whole world changed, my family changed. They were all like, what are you doing? You had scholarships, you were so focused, and what are you doing now? And I said, I just found something that I'm going to enjoy the rest of my life. I realized I was writing all the time. I played Dungeons and Dragons in school. I was already always writing dungeons for, to play with my friends. And so I went on to that. I got a chance to do a couple of internships in college. I was um, helping a historian on converting one of her books into a screenplay, which was
That's
really,
neat.
yeah, it was so fascinating. She basically wrote, um, her book was called The Women of the Conquistadors. And she basically wrote a book about how women influenced these historical men, that how much they influenced them to do things. And some of the things weren't the men, but the women doing it. It was very fascinating. And it's all factual, it was nonfiction. And so I was helping to convert some things into a screenplay. And so I learned a lot from her, in my writing and stories and how to research. I was really fascinated by that. And she basically said anything you can find in history is can be put anywhere. You could use that and put it in the future. You could put it on another planet. And so I started looking at some of the stories, and she let me actually pick a story out of her book because it covered 100 years, and I picked something like towards the end, around 1597, about a woman who basically started in Peru and ended up in the Philippines on an expedition with her husband, but no one knows what happened in between. And it was very horrifying of what happened when they arrived in the Philippines. And so I discussed her historically things about what possibly could have happened. And then I'm a plotter in the beginning, and then I do the pantsing of just blowing it away. And so she gave me, it started here and it ended in the Philippines. You write the rest of the story. So I did my research, and it was just fascinating how to build that story out. And got a honorable mention from Writer's Digest for the screenplay, which I was like very happy. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Um, Historical romances weren't popular at that time, so I couldn't sell the script. And then a second internship I got was actually as a script advisor on a martial art film in the Philippines, which was very fascinating because it never happened. We got there, and the government was unstable. This is in the late
Mm.
80s. So we had to leave. But very fascinating reviewing scripts and story and adjusting it to the scenery, or something on the spot. That was like, getting directions from, hey, here's our story, but we need this rewritten and we need it this way, made me realize, I can't stick to my stories if I love them, because there's a reason you
Yeah.
need to change it. So I learned quickly to be flexible, as I'm writing. Um, and then graduated, moved to Hollywood, brought my screenplays with me. I was going to break into Hollywood. A year later, I'm like, the writer's strike had hit. Nothing was happening in Hollywood. Went back home, got married, um, and said, I'm just going to write. I'll write screenplays up here and I'll, try to sell them. And then, kids come along, got to pay the bills. So
Life
got in,
happens.
yeah, life happens. And I had a teacher, professor who said, the more, as life goes on, you will become a better writer and have better things to say about writing because you'll experience more. He goes, just experience. He goes, you don't have to wait till you're 50 or 60, but he goes, don't hide in the room. You need to get out, you need to experience life, but then come back and write about it, put it in with your characters and stuff. And so, as I worked in IT and I traveled East Coast, West Coast, and I was stuck at airports, I just started taking notes and I just started watching people. I'm a big people watcher and just wondering where their lives were coming one way and going the other. And so I started taking notes. I ended up now, I've got like 34 stories or books outlined covering about 10 different series. Most of them, I think of marketing, I think of stories, I think of the audience, I think of all the different levels, just because in filmmaking, at film school, you learn not just the story, but you learned about the contracts and the actors and the dialogue and the rhythm and the tone. And so I
It's a
think
lot of moving
everything,
parts.
yeah, a lot of, so I think of everything. So if I start writing a book, I'm already wondering, how does the second book connect to this? And if I put anything in my book, even a little detail, it's going to show up later in the story or in the next book. So little subplots here and there, that I start discovering as I start looking at my stories, where, wait a minute, this little detail here is going to be a big part in the story in the second book, and stuff like that. So that's basically, what I was doing, is I was still outlining and creating these stories, and then life, took over. And then now with my kids moving out of the house, I'm getting a lot more time. I start writing, fleshing out, because I kind of do the bones and then I flesh out. And so got out in 2019, got my first book published. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. It was tough. I converted a screenplay into a novel, and the tough part was I was stuck with the screenplay structure, and I didn't like
Mm.
that. And so it is, it's, I look at the first book, I wrote it as like Evil Dead. If you ever seen Evil Dead,
Oh
it's kind of
yeah.
like a little bit comedy, a little horror, it's kind of, and so that's the approach I took on that. And so writing it, it was fun to see, but I found myself a little bit constricted in where I could go with it, because I wanted to kind of stay with the story. Um, and so it was very story focused, not character focused. Um,
Okay.
then the second one came out. I wrote that I mean, took 5 years for the first book, 6 months for the second book, and was not during, was it COVID? No, it was tail end of COVID. Um, 6 months, and it was just, I sat down and every night I just wrote. And the funny thing about that is I had key points in the structure, but I didn't have everything. I had gaps in there, and I started writing. I had characters come alive that weren't in the story or the outline, and they took over. And I have two characters, two female characters that are like, you are missing this. You need me in this story. And I'm like, what are you talking about? My
Where
family
did you
thinks
come from? Nobody
it,
invited you.
yeah, exactly. My family thinks I'm weird because they hear me talking to myself and they're like, "What? What'd you say?" I'm like, "Nothing. I'm just arguing with this character." right now, and they're just like they're
Every good
crazy.
writer does that.
It's crazy. I argue with them, and then there's sometimes where I just let go and I let them write. And I'm like, okay, I just put my music on, I get into the groove, and in 6 months I had the second book done, and of course then goes the editing and all that. But it was like these two characters just came out of no. I had nowhere outlined. I had no research on them. They just came out and they told me what their story was in my story. They're like, no, I'm the ex-lover of this person, and I'm this person over here, and this is why, it was just amazing. I have to say, I go back and read my books, and it's the second one. I don't know who wrote it. It's like I don't know where I was when I was writing it, because these characters are just like, it doesn't even sound like how I normally write, which I loved. I enjoyed that one so much. Um, and
I think,
so
being able to pick out and find and then roll with those characters, that's a very rare talent. Um, Especially being able to let them have their own voice to the point where, like you said, it doesn't even necessarily feel like you writing anymore. It's that character telling their story. And I love that you were able to translate that.
yeah, it was mind blowing. I'd never had that experience before, and so that's who I am. Sorry, I probably got
No,
beyond.
you're fine. I I have to know, what has ever become of the lady that went from Peru to the Philippines? Has that been shelved? Are you ever going to return to her? Because now I'm intrigued.
I'm gonna write it. I will write it in a book format. I have to check the contract. I did sign a contract
Oh,
with her, and she passed away. But I got to check with the family if I can write it as a novel. I
okay.
do have the rights to write it as a screenplay. Um, and it was, I will tell you what happened in reality. Um, they were left with three ships. They were going to the Solomon Islands, and historically, she was a very young woman. She married a very old captain who was on his last expedition. They figured he wasn't going to be around much longer. She married him, and as they had left on their three boats out of Peru, they disappeared. And then one ship showed up in the Philippines, in Manila, and the entire crew of men were only left. They had colonists on them, but they were gone. They just had the sailors for the ship, and they were almost skin and bones,
Oh,
all
oh,
of them, except
oh.
her. She was in. They said she was sitting on this trunk on the top deck, looking out as the ship came in, and she looked ravishly well fed, and she looked um, untainted from the voyage.
Wow.
And so I had to come up when I read the historical documents on what they described, these, of how the ship was barely afloat coming into the harbor, and how this majestic dressed woman was just sitting there full strength. I mean, she could throw any of the men overboard because they had no strength left. How could that happen? How could And so in the story, in the screenplay, she manipulates all the men against each other,
Hmm.
ending up destroying. And she starts with the strong ones, but then she slowly works down to getting rid of them to where she's taken over the ship. Yeah. And the historian says it could have happened.
Oh, yeah.
We have no way of knowing.
And
But
then
she
there's me who's like, she's a vampire.
Yeah, no, I know. That's what I was going to throw in, but I had to keep it historic because it is a
Yeah.
historical romance kind of thing. She did, in reality, go and marry the governor of the Philippines. Yeah,
Woman knew how to get her way in life then.
yeah,
I can, especially in that era, I can appreciate somebody who could do that.
yeah. And that's what I looked at it too. I thought that's great.
So I hear that you have a fascination with those Friday night, late night horror movies, the sci-fi reruns. I know we already talked a little bit about Evil Dead.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorites, the ones that really stand out and inspire you?
Oh my God. I have been watching old horror movies, British classic horror movies since I was like in junior high. And the sad thing is I still sleep with the cover over my head at night. I do. I figured if my head's covered, the monsters can't see me. They don't think I'm there.
It's like don't put your toes over the edge because
Yeah.
they'll eat them.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. I just love the old just campy horror movies. I've always loved those. I don't find them scary. I find them intriguing. I've always in every movie I watch, whether it's good or bad, I always see what the good stuff is about it. What worked in the story, what worked in the, being from the film background, what worked in that scene from the angles, how they approach the rhythm of the scene. I studied in film school, I studied Hitchcock and Disney. I did Hitchcock for how did he make something so mysterious and creepy like murder, and how does that, build up? And then with Disney, I loved looking at the villains he created. I mean, these are
Mhm.
villains that really a little kid should be scared of at the level that evilness they have, but yet it's acceptable and not threatening to a little kid, but they know they're bad, and stuff.
Mhm.
And then what I like happening right now at Disney is they're giving backstories to the villains finally,
I
and
know,
I
I
I
love
love
that.
I love that because we're all born innocent is how I see the world. Everything and to have and become evil, what path did they take? What happened in their lives, and that's what I try to do in my stories. um, is I always allow redemption if possible with someone who's evil. I look at good characters that could become evil.
Mhm.
I actually do have one storyline that the hero in the beginning in the third book is not a hero anymore. Else has moved in just for the fact that, you eventually lose that if you don't focus and stay strong, to your character, to your
Mhm.
beliefs, and so
All it takes is one little unhappy turn of events and it could change the whole course.
yeah, exactly. But like for movies, I love The House That Dripped Blood. I love anything with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in back.
Yes.
I just love those, and the dialogue, and I see dialogue as poetry, and that's a last revision when I go through my stories is I get the dialogue out to get what needs to be done. And sometimes if I'm in a creative mood, I'll be, creative about it. But when I go through to do my editing and my dialogue, I look at it differently as how can I make this poetically written in a way that works on different levels, and how is it like because I love the dialogue where they're talking, their words are saying one thing but you can tell they're talking something else.
Hmm.
I like that, double meaning.
The
And then
subtext there.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
the or even the innuendos of what is going on, or maybe one character is not picking it up and the other one is like just keeps hinting, and stuff. I like to leave little like things along the way for the reader, and then can they figure it out? Can they see if this little factor mention of this is going to connect? Because you gotta at the end you can't just say, oh, here's the bad guy. You got to give little hints, but you have to do it in a way that they don't figure it out, right
Hmm.
away, or they could be different people or something like that.
Yeah, you got to keep the intrigue going.
Yeah.
So your your books, they lean into I know you mentioned writing some of the historic, little historic fiction, historic romance, but it sounds like some of your writing also leans into the horror genre
Yes.
pretty heavily. So
Yeah.
what is one theme in that horror genre that you can't get enough of?
um it's for me that the theme is just the one person or the one innocent person fighting evil, and how do they overcome it and how do they escape it? um and in the theme I like paranormal. I'm not a slasher horror, that that's more visual. You have to you know, leave it to that. But I like just horror of someone innocent, regular day, and then their world just starts changing, and they're dealing with things that they don't believe existed before or know existed. And then how do they deal with it? Do they move on? Do they try to stay not, unchanging? Do they deny it? And based on their actions, what the rest of the world around them changes to. Like in my first book, Gate of Torment, I wrote that as a revenge story to get back to the customers. I used to work at a grocery store. I like, I was like, how would these people get killed at a grocery store? Because they're so annoying, And so that's the basis of the first book is 12 years of working at a grocery store, and you get these crazy customers, and then and some employees, and so I just started taking notes on would they die and it was starting out like a slasher. I mean, that's my focus originally, but then as it developed, the characters came more and more alive. The Grace and Alan, the two main characters, just started going, I can't do a slasher with them. They got to build a relationship and stuff. But there's things in there that I like to play on stereotypes and twist them, or monsters that you think are this way, but they're not. I don't like to always go with, vampires that you think certain rules. I mean, historically, we get facts wrong. So in our world, maybe vampires aren't as bad as they really are said, because maybe they want people to think they're scary when they're maybe not as scary, or certain creatures do or don't exist. Like once you know, just because you bring in a vampire, does that mean a werewolf exists? Does that mean, what other, maybe some worlds have the vampire, but they don't have werewolves. Why? But, so that's kind of what I start playing with. Or um, like in a grocery store, in a horror film, you think the meat department would probably be the best place to have the most bloodiest scenes, because that's the meat department. That's where all the dead meat is. And I couldn't do that. I had to have a conversation in that department in the book. I didn't have the monsters do anything there, because it's like it was all dead meat. They wanted live meat, and that's kind of
Yeah.
why, so that's how I approached that book. And then the second book became more building the relationship between the two characters that survived, and trying to get away from it, not realizing as they run away from it, they were running right into it again, and how they deal with that. So, and that was fun too. And the third book, each book, and in fact, all my stories, each starts subtle and small, and then they just escalate. Each book like just doubles the intensity and the level of what you think this is a simple story. And then by the end, maybe the whole galaxy is going to blow up. I don't know. It could go that far, It's like, but you got to, have those little pieces connect the story logically and make sense, believable to some degree.
I love that. Excuse me. I love that your Hellgate books there, they build on that mundane and then take it into, the realm of, well, what is this supernatural? Is it something I'm going to accept? And your
Yeah.
characters are then, even after they go through it, they try to run away from it. But that's the world that they live in. That's that universe. They don't get away from it.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Now, I know you had mentioned being a plotter and a pantser, and then of course you have like the hybrid, which I think you and I probably both are, the plantsers, which is a fun word to say anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so which one of those? So you start out with a little bit of plotting, and then you kind of just let your characters run. How does that process develop for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I got a lot of when you travel, you have a lot of time at the airport for work. And so I just come up with a what if scenario, and then from there I build out the story forward and backwards. And then I kind of find excuse me, I find a beginning and an end. And then in that process, characters start popping up. And then I kind of secure certain points in the story that would stay solid. Like if you look at Doctor Who, where he says there's certain points in time are fixed, you can't change them. So that's where I see how I build that out. And then after that, I just start writing because by then the characters are already talking to me. Um, the they kind of tell me what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. And when I try to force them in a direction on the story, I can tell they fight
Mm.
me, and there's times where I've kind of changed some of those solid points a little bit, but not always. They'll either change or I figure a way around it. Like they may not address it, but the other characters might be able to hit that point, and go on. Um, so I keep it somewhat as a structure, but it becomes fluid as the story develops, as the characters develop, the subplots, anything that's subplot that's not resolved will be in the next book, and it'll be bigger and more, deeper. Um, I got, God, now I'm thinking it's like I've got fantasy. Everything I do is that approach is the same for all my genres. I mean, fantasy, sci-fi. Um, that's pretty much how I work.
So what would your advice be to writers who are maybe struggling with that process and finding their voice within it?
Um, See, that's where I get a little cautious on advice for how to do things because everyone's different.
100%.
Um, Going through all my writing classes through college and stuff, I had to tell people because they wanted a formula, and I'm like, you guys, you can't do the formula. What works for this writer won't work for you. I use music. You get music, I associate music with all my stories. So if you want me to talk about a story, I know what music to play that I can pop out the entire story with you because for the memory, but I also take notes. But for a writer coming in is just start writing, start outlining, start listening to what other people do to inspire them to write, to open up their mind. For me, it's a creative flow that I have certain music I play that I've trained my mind to flip into that mode immediately just by playing certain songs. And that's what's worked for me, And then making sure you write about what you know, but doesn't mean you have to know it in the sense of, and I always struggle with this because I had one professor, write what you know, it will just fill in those gaps. And I'm like, but I'm doing sci-fi, I'm doing horror, and then I start realizing that if you write, like in the first book I wrote, I worked 12 years in a grocery store. So I knew it. Doesn't mean I knew about the killing and how, you know what I mean? But it's like when you start thinking that way, and I knew the customers because I had dealt with them, it's like that was my starting to understand that as you write, my characters are probably a mixture of two or three people I know in my life, you know and then when I see it that way, they came to life as one character, their personalities merge, the experiences, I'd say 80% of what's in my books is part of my life in places where, like, not the killing, not the blood and guts, but locations,
Yeah,
maybe
for
some of
legal
the,
reasons, there's been no killing.
yeah, there's no killings yet that they found yet. um but it's like I share a lot of myself and my own experience in my books for the fact that it gives, I feel, a genuine feeling of reality. I mean, there's things that my wife has said. There's in book two, there's a casino scene. My wife said some of those things. In fact, our anniversary in the dance area of book two, my wife and I experienced similar things. So I put those in as just little things. And then when I read it, it just fit. You know what I mean? There was other things I didn't put in the story that also happened, but it just helped me feel in those gaps to make it a little bit more real.
So I would, and I completely agree with like, you got to be careful with advice because some folks latch onto it as gospel, but
Yeah,
um, trying to seek out what's familiar and then grow from there,
exactly.
and what feels right for you, like you said earlier, trying to force something, it it feels like you're forcing it. It doesn't feel like it's fitting. And then
Yeah,
when you let it flow, it really, really just locks into place. Uh, one of the big things with writing, of course, writing is usually done as a solitary act. It can be a
yes.
little isolating, a lot isolating. And being part of a community can really kind of help things keep going and keep flowing. What has being part of the Broadleaf Writers Association meant for you?
It's actually meant a lot. I moved from California to Nashville in 2019. I have joined various writers groups over the years. The majority of them aren't really helpful for writers, and it's sad. They kind of get in, they're stuck in their circle, and they don't really
Mm.
grow and help a lot of the members. In fact, I see them discourage members. And with Broadleaf, I attended the conference two years ago online with my daughter, and it was the first time I felt like the entire membership and the leaders of Broadleaf supported everyone at every level. It wasn't focused on one area of writing process. It was all levels and very welcoming. And then last year in person, I attended, and that was great too. I'm shy, so in the beginning, I sit back, I watch, I don't really interact, but I love talking to people about their stories or help them troubleshoot through maybe a writer's block. I mean, I've done so many exercise on how to get my mind open to get past those, and I love sharing ideas to them on that. But it's just been a real positive encouragement. So like I'm here writing, and stuff, but I know conferences are coming up, and the members, I just recently became a member a couple months ago. So it's like I'm happy. That's why it took 2 years for me to decide that. But it's something that I truly think will benefit any member at any level, and not to get discouraged, because we all have challenges, we all have different challenges, but somewhere you're going to meet someone and you can relate to, or maybe have a similar situation, or maybe someone can help you get past something you're struggling with. It's good to have a community to plug into, especially when you go in those dark corners and you're writing, and you come out, you're like, what is this? And then, you share, and it is like a baby. It's like a child. Here's my precious little gift I just created, and you want to show the world. But and I'm at the point now, and in the beginning I probably would have been blown away, but I'm at the point now where I reveal something and it's not, great, I'm okay with that. You tell me what's wrong. What do you see? What did I miss? And I be open to that, and then you reflect on your heart of, what they pointed out maybe not be work isn't working. Why? But, realize in your heart, what is it? Maybe your audience is wrong for what you're writing. Maybe this is
Mhm.
more of a just feel good book for yourself, and if you don't have an audience, doesn't matter. You wrote what you wanted, you know. If your goal is to, you know, be a big author in young adult stories, well, then you're going to have to listen to more criticism and write more for that genre of what's successful, and be willing to make those changes and listen. Because you can go rogue, but don't get upset if it's not working for
If it
you
doesn't
on your
land.
goals. Yeah, it's
And sometimes, when we're so close to our work, having that support, having that other perspective, from folks who understand the passion and the struggle, it makes a big difference.
yes. No, it does.
So what's next for you? What are you working on right now?
Oh my God.
Oh,
Okay. So out of those 34 books. I'm going to move on to I'm in the middle of my third book for Hellgate series. It'll be the last one. It won't. It's the last one for these three. I can always. It's always written away. I can add more later, but I'm going to finish the series with Gate of Judgment, and then I'm going to move on to a young adult sci-fi. And as you know, I do IT and stuff. And I'm not thrilled with IT. I mean, I'm not. I don't love computers. I I
They
can.
love you, you don't
Yeah, they
love
love
them.
me. So it's going to be a one where it's machine against man. You know, that typical stereotypic, but it won't be. It's already. I've got 3 books outlined for it, and each book is going to twist the first book on what you think is going on to something totally different, to something totally different.
Okay.
And I'm thrilled about it because I was sharing it with my kids, and they're like, "Why don't you write it? Where is it? Why?" You know, and I'm like, "Well, I
Get to
just need time. I
writing.
need to finish this one." So that's what I'm going to work on next, and the characters are, fleshed out. I just got to get the time to write it out. You know,
Now, are you planning, and are your previous books published through an agent or do you independently publish?
independently published through Amazon.
Oh, cool.
So
Okay.
so they're ebooks, they're soft paperback, and they're hardbound, and they're all on Amazon. And then for me, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, VC Marello. I have my own author page that's vcmarello.com. I try to blog. I'm not real good at blogging yet. I'm going to learn how to pick that up. But I'm going to, try to do more and share more there. And it's fun to share. It's hard to, I'm not one to be very open and vocal about my writing. I'm quiet about it, but when you find others like you that are doing it, it gets exciting, and then the energy builds, and it's fun, because it helps you put that armor on when you go out there to try to show your book or, get an agent. So, and that's where my second series, I will be looking for an agent on that one.
Okay.
And if it doesn't go anywhere, then I'll just self-publish it.
Well, I mean, you've got the experience on there for
Yeah.
sure. So, um, I've appreciated you sitting down to talk with me about your writing and your process and the journey that you've been on. I am so glad to have you as part of the Broadleaf Writers Association. I'm going to have to pick up some copies of your books because I have worked customer facing jobs and I can't wait to see what happens to these grocery store people. And I will look forward to your adventures in sci-fi whenever that comes out as well.
Thank you. It was fun. Thank you. Appreciate it.